Dushayu's gorilla specimens captured the imaginations of the cartoonists of the time, playing their part in the debates around Darwin's The Origin of Species.
Am I satyr or man? Pray tell me who can and settle my place in the scale. A man in ape shape, an anthropoid ape, or a monkey deprived of his tail? Then Darwin set forth in a book of much worth the importance of nature's selection, how the struggle for life is a laudable strife and results in specific distinction.
For a while, the gorilla was seen as the likely candidate for mankind's closest relative.
Then apes have no nose, and thumbs for great toes, and a pelvis both narrow and slight. They can't stand upright, unless to show fight with Dushayu, that chivalrous knight.
Dushayu's vivid accounts of the Congo presented the idea of a place full of other human-like ancestors, leading to speculation that this forest was rich with tribes of people further down the evolutionary tree than the European white male.
Et donc on essaye de faire une hiérarchie dans les races, depuis la race européenne jusqu'aux nouvelles races découvertes, et essentiellement les races négroïdes. Et on se demande aussi dans quelle mesure certains singes sont plus proches finalement de ces dernières races humaines qui sont au bas de l'échelle évolutionniste.
So far, Dushayu had created the image of a great African forest brimming with natural history specimens and as an exotic habitat for early prototypes of humankind. But soon, an event occurred which was to utterly transform the European attitude to the Congo region and to dictate its destiny right up until the present day. On August the 9th, 1877, Henry Morton Stanley, a man who discovered Livingstone, reached the mouth of the Congo having blazed a trail across the great uncharted centre of the continent.
Basically, Stanley's journey, arriving at the Congo River, it started the sounding gun for the scramble for Africa. 20 hectic years of white man staking the interior of Africa. So it really was a massive turning point.
This unimaginably huge tract of Africa was suddenly open. A whole area of the map had been filled in.
Stanley's achievement was considerable. His journey had been sponsored by the New York Herald in the United States and the London Daily Telegraph. His self-promoting articles, augmented by extensive lecturing tours, presented his account of his voyage across what he called the Dark Continent. This massive bestseller, full of exaggeration, described an heroic journey down a river and through dense forests full of violent tribes.
To the ordinary white man, it was what may well be termed impenetrable, except at constant peril of his life. It was ravaged by cannibals, fierce warlike tribes, and Arab slave raiders. Every tribe barred the ingress of the traveller, and its frontier on all sides lay exposed to any white stranger who took the trouble to plant a flag.
It was a bestseller, but yes, it consigned this part of Africa to a stereotype, to an image, an Africa that was inherently brutal, almost irredeemably so. So going from, perhaps in the start of the 19th century, some of these voyages that were genuinely scientific, or had at their heart this sort of perhaps enlightened goal of adding to knowledge, of scientific inquiry, to a mindset that was bristlingly imperial and an African casting the African continent as something that was irredeemably savage and therefore had to be saved by the enlightened knowledge of an empire. Perhaps Stanley is responsible for setting the African continent down that path of subjugation and colonial domination.
Stanley présente son arrivée au Congo comme, en fait, presque un sauveur, c'est-à-dire qu'il va apporter la lumière occidentale à cette région. Il démontre que les populations locales et toute l'histoire du fleuve n'a pas d'histoire avant l'arrivée des Européens et avant son arrivée.
There was certainly going to be a new history. By demonstrating that the Congo was navigable, Stanley alerted European powers to the possibility that the entire equatorial forest could be divided up. Within 8 years of the publication of Through the Dark Continent, France, Germany, Spain, Portugal and Great Britain had carved out portions. And the king of one small nation had grabbed half of it as his own personal fiefdom. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, described the great swathe of African forest as this magnificent African cake.
Never does he step 1 foot on Africa, and yet he holds an astonishing record. He is the man who has claimed as his own one piece of land larger than any other human ever has. He took that land as his plaything, as his fiefdom, as his private estate. It's astonishing. It's 1 million square miles, like 3 million square kilometres of equatorial forest, river system, savanna, and he regards it as a large, large cake from which he can derive whatever goods he can.
The abundance of animals and plants in his new forests were no longer merely objects of scientific interest. They'd help him finance an empire. His initial source of income came from forest elephants. Though smaller than their relatives in East Africa, they still packed a lot of ivory. The export of ivory was so lucrative that the animals were driven close to extinction. But soon another more lucrative example of the region's abundance was to change the king's fortunes and the forest itself.
Leopold was looking to the Congo to exploit its, mineral wealth, rubber particularly at this point at the end of the 19th century, rubber being used for automobile tyres, but crucially being used for the insulation on electric cables and telephone and the telegraph. These modern technologies dependent on rubber. It was a boom, immense wealth, but it came at immense cost.
There was no idea of plantations at this time, and so tapping them would need to rely on the local knowledge and labour of the forest's inhabitants. And this was to be a primary example of how the region's riches would become associated with misery.
Frankly, it was the first genocide of the modern era. Between 1885 to 1908, between 4 and 10 million people died. 4 and 10 million. These are numbing figures.
The adjective darkness was to become indelibly attached to the Western imaginings of the Congo with the publication of Conrad's novella in 1899.
Going up that river was like travelling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. An empty stream, a great silence, an impenetrable forest. The air was warm, thick, heavy, sluggish. There was no joy in the brilliance of sunshine. The long stretches of waterway ran on deserted into the gloom of overshadowed distances. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness.